Welcome, everybody. Good morning. And just to reiterate, as Abhi said, yesterday's session was absolutely brilliant. In fact, many of the sessions were fantastic. And the one on Rwanda was obviously brilliant. Do remember that you can ask questions of Mr. Singh and Meenal Baghel by typing it into the comment section below. So do that, and I will continue to use those questions to pose it to both our speakers today. Meenal Baghel, Mr. Karnal Singh, welcome to the Media Rumble, TMR Online. Honor to have both of you on board. Meenal, I'm going to start with you. Flashback 2012. The same case today, because it has all the elements of love, passion, socialites, a handsome person, a rake. It has every ingredient that would have caught the fancy of the present day media, television as well as online media, and would have overtaken perhaps the more important news that we have as we're seeing, whether it's on China or the economy, etc. Tell us a little bit about how you stumbled upon the story and how you put together such a fabulous, racy, brilliant book, and then, of course, how it was converted into a film.
Thank you, Sanjoy. It's a pleasure to be here. Going back to the murder of television executive Neeraj Grover in Mumbai and the involvement of Emil Jerome, who was a naval lieutenant, and Maria Susairaj, an aspiring actress. What was similar to that? Actually, there are a few similarities, but some very crucial differences between the Ria and Sushant case. So I got interested in Maria's story is because, typically you have all the protagonists were attractive people. They were associated with glamour. There was a certain element of small town meets the big city. All the three people were from small towns whose lives sort of collided in Mumbai. So those were very interesting things. But for specific to our discussion today was the way the Mumbai police hyped up the case. There are several murders, but because the Mumbai police knows what the media wants, and as does the police in the rest of the country. So they fed us interesting bits about the body being cut up into several pieces, tidbits about Maria's character, that, how she, the whole idea of casual sex. There was some element of drugs involved. There were allegations that the people involved used recreational drugs. So that's how I got interested in the case, and I wanted to understand the pathology of a killing and what it tells us about society, urban society at large. That was how I got interested in the case. But the one crucial difference between the current case is that the media's interest is exponential now. Also, there is an element of politics which was completely missing in the earlier case. This case has been now directly linked to politics, which makes it even, shall we say, more challenging and murkier.
Meenal, given that at that point of time, there was such a lot of reportage on it, to the extent that Neeraj's parents themselves refused to take the body or claim the body on the case. And in your understanding, where was the issue? Rather, why was the police trying to create this hype and in some ways try and also link it to the Nanavati case as it then, which was the cause célèbre case in all of this? I mean, that was the beginning. Yes. So if you can just go back into history, because what I would love to do is just establish for our audiences how crime and murder and a crime of passion became so much of a headline issue.
So if you, Sanjoy, if you allow me to go back a little bit,
Yeah.
basically in Mumbai, for instance, the police and the media have a really symbiotic relationship, right? Before 2005, so two things happened. One was that over the years, through the 80s and the 90s, the underworld in Mumbai was at its peak, right? And there was a lot of glamour attached among the crime reporters to report on underworld killings, and it so happened that, so there were these underworld factions. The media was also, it also became turned into factions. So there were people who were like who had access to stories from the Dawood camp. There were people who had access to stories from the Rajan camp. And the same thing happened with the cops. And cops, I think, like most other people, also like to be in the news. And they saw themselves valorized, and films were made. And the other thing that happened in Mumbai in 2005 was there was a huge explosion of media. So, say, Mumbai Mirror was launched in 2005, DNA was launched in 2005, the Hindustan Times edition in Mumbai was launched. So, you suddenly, media became very, very big. Times Now was launched at that time. So there was a huge proliferation and explosion of media, and it became very, very powerful. And the cops, who are always, very smart, and understood that the media could be used. So there was a huge race among journalists to, get the breaking news, to get, to get that exclusive, which in turn was used by police, and not just by the police, by say politicians, to sort of also play and put out their own agenda. And that is where I think the start of the problems that beset journalism today began.
Karnal Singh ji, at the same time in Delhi, 2008, 19 September, you were part of the special cell. It was 10:45 a.m. in the morning. Two teams were on their way to Batla House. This was post the devastating terrorist attacks that had happened on the 13th of September. Tell us a little bit about kya hua tha and what happened when the teams headed towards Batla House, and the situation when Mr. Mohan Chand Sharma at 11 o'clock in the morning called you.
See, there were two teams which had been sent for searching the place. That is L18 Batla House. One team was headed by Inspector Mohan Chand Sharma. The second team, the backup team, was headed by ACP Sanjeev Yadav. I was sitting in the special cell office. At 10:45 a.m., Mohan Chand Sharma rang me up saying that there are certain people inside the flat and they are going in. I was waiting for the next report from the team when around sometime, maybe around 20 minutes later, Sanjeev Yadav rang me up. His voice was choking and he told that Mohan has got bullet injury and head constable Balwant has got bullet injury and both are being shifted to hospital. Terrorists are still holed up inside. So I told him that we have to catch them alive. Try to put whatever manpower is there at there. I'm also coming to the spot. And then I requested police headquarters to send 5 companies of the force and 1 platoon of commandos. I, along with DCP Alok, we reached the spot immediately. By that time, there was second encounter has taken place with Sanjeev team. And then I questioned my team people what has happened. So Sub-Inspector Rahul, who was there in the Mohan's team, he explained that the 7-member team had gone to the building, L18 building. This flat 108 number was on the 4th floor. One Sub-Inspector, Dharmender, went up. He was attired in Vodafone executive because one of the terrorists was having the phone of Vodafone. When he went up, he observed that there are voices from inside. So he came down, then the team went up. There were 2 doors to the flat. They knocked at the door, but it was bolted from inside. Suddenly, voices. Then the Mohan shouted that they are from the police. Please come out. No response from inside. But then one of the officers noted that the another door was open. The team entered. Then there was a firing from two sides on the police team. One was from the drawing room side and another from one room. In that firing, and police team also fired back. In that process, one of the terrorists fell down. Two were able to escape from the other door, while Mohanchand Sharma and Head Constable Balwant got injuries. And on the one room, in the left room, there were some people. We were not knowing one, two at that time. So Mohanchand Sharma and Head Constable Balwant, they were taken to the hospital. Then the second team reached there. They tried to apprehend the person from the left room. As soon as they entered, they were firing from the both sides, and one of the person from the left room, he got bullet injuries, and one person was caught from the bathroom. That was the incident that took place.
Kanal Singh ji, if you rewind to a few days before that, when the terrorist attacks actually happened across Delhi, and if you can tell us a little bit about how that played out and the efforts that the investigation group led by you made to be able to uncover this whole track, the way that you tracked the emails, the phone calls. Tell us the process that led to this.
See, an investigation of any case, whether it is a terrorism-related case or the criminal case, it starts from the spot. Now, in this case, when we reach the spot, one can see what type of cuttings of the objects are there. See, generally, if there is a low explosive, it is a jarred cuttings. If it is high explosive, it is a sharp cuttings of the things, like iron sheets are there, how they are cut. So one observes that in this particular case, there were jarred cuttings. That indicated that the explosive used was the low explosive. Then you observe like the smell of any chemical. So there was a smell of the chemical, which one could observe at that place. And because of that, you can understand which type of low explosive is there. That is the one thing one gets from that spot. The another thing is that there is a possibility that the person who planted the bomb could have got injuries himself or could have died himself. Therefore, in the hospital, whosoever gone for treatment, or even the person who has died, the person who are being treated, they are interrogated to find out their incidents. The person who have died, their incidents are also gets verified. That is another thing. Then once you know the explosive, one goes to the explosive shops. There are around 500 explosive shops in Delhi to ascertain who purchased the explosive, because the shop owners, they keep the records who had purchased the explosive. So that is another investigation goes on. Thirdly, was any phone used by the terrorists at this spot? So we collect dump data. Dump data is a data of all the phones which were used through the cell tower at that places. In this particular case, terrorists were not using the mobile phone, so dump data was of not any help to us. Then there are a large number of CCTV cameras located at various places. So one goes through the scanning the CCTV cameras, we get the record of that and scans that if there is any possibility of finding out any movement of suspicious person in that.
Kanal Singh ji, you were talking about the dump data from the towers, the triangulation, but usme in the kitab, you've sort of talked about how there was this closed loop call that was going between three phones and how you were able to, and even though it was being disconnected very quickly, you all were still able to use that to determine as part of your investigation.
I'll come back to that. I was just telling from the spot what we were observing, what we were seeing. There were two eyewitnesses also in this particular case. One was the balloon boy Rahul, and another was auto driver. So they also got the sketches made. They were very, very good sketches they had got made. Then we had to put those sketches in the newspapers. And even in that, certain people said that they have seen so and so. Those people were verified. Besides this, what happened is there was blast in Gujarat on 26 July, the same year. The Gujarat police had arrested some of the CMI members who were involved in the blast cases. Those two of the important CMI members, they were could not be arrested. Those members were connected with Indian Mujahideen. Now, the persons who were arrested, they gave 3 phone numbers used by the terrorists, the Indian Mujahideen people. These 3 phone numbers were only talking to themselves. There was no outside call, except one call came to one phone, which shows 1 second incoming call. What happens is, suppose somebody makes a call to me or to you, and if you don't accept the call and you disconnect it shows that accepted call of 1 second. So generally people ignore such calls, but Mohanchand Sharma did not ignore it. He tried to find out who this man was, who rang up at least on this number. So this number found to be belonging to a person from Lucknow in Uttar Pradesh. But at the point of time when he made this call, he was in Mumbai, though he had not gone to Gujarat. The analysis of this number indicated that this number was in touch with one number in Delhi, staying in the Batla house area, and this number was of Atif, one of the terrorists who died finally in the encounter on 19th.
In Sadiq Nagar.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this was the one clue. The second clue came on 18th of September. What happened is that in the Gujarat, terrorists had used one thief for 4 vehicles. 2 vehicles were planted in the Ahmedabad hospitals. 2 vehicles were planted in Surat hospitals. The purpose was that when the injured or family members come to the hospitals, the car bomb will explode, causing more casualties of the people who had come to the hospital. But fortunately, there was no explosion in Surat, and 2 vehicles which were placed did not explode. As a result, their number plate, chassis number, etc., they were found. And on further investigation, it was found that these cars were stolen from Navi Mumbai. Thereafter, Mumbai police questioned a large number of car thieves, and ultimately on 18th, they caught one thief who said yes, he provided these vehicles to the terrorists. He took them to a place in Ahmedabad, where he told that around 13% had come from Delhi. They traveled by Rajdhani Express in the evening of 26th after planting the bombs. So this was a very crucial information which came on 18th afternoon. So our team started working on that. First idea was, so many people were coming from the Ahmedabad on that. How to find out who are these 13 people? So what we thought is, if these people have gone from Delhi, therefore there is a very possibility that they have got written reservation done from Delhi. So our teams scanned all those people who had got written reservation from Delhi and found that there are 13 people got reservations, not all 13 together, four like that, but their addresses could not be verified. Then I asked my team members from where this reservation was done and where was the location of Atif at that time, his phone location. So it was found that the phone was done from Nijamuddin, and Atif was also, the reservation was done from Nijamuddin railway station, and Atif's phone number was also found to be at Nijamuddin railway station. This gives a doubt. Then we went through the whole conversation which had taken place between him and his friends, colleagues, which were innocuous conversation. Like one conversation says, Shakil talking to Atif saying that there is no place to locate an auto in this area. So then Atif says, then what will you do? He says, okay, I'll manage. When we observe this, Shakil position was in Karol Bagh. So this gives further doubt. Now all these doubts was pointing out towards the person Atif in the Batla house. With that information, our team went to search at that location.
I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Singh, because I want to get a little bit more clarity on how you used media positively to be able to get the citizens of Delhi to help identify where some of these explosives were, whether it was in Regal, whether it was Rahul, the balloon center. But Meenal, coming back to you, in the same way that this investigation happened in Delhi, and of course it was a completely different set of circumstances by the police special cell. When you started researching what happened in the murder case in Bombay, what did you find? Did you find a complicity? Did you find that there was an effort to be able to subvert some of the evidence? Did you find that there were leaks happening between the police and the media, which was perhaps inappropriate or perhaps to create red herrings? What is it that you encountered, and how did you cut through? Because there was so much, when I was reading the book and when I was actually researching online late last night and seeing the kind of stuff that had come up, which is quite, which throws the red herring. Tell us about how you cut through that and your experience of what
So, two, three things, Sanjoy. One is that this was a fairly straightforward case, unlike, say, a terror case or custodial killings or encounter deaths. This was a fairly straightforward crime of passion. However, and I'm smiling because the cops always want to plant something or the other. There are always red herrings. In no matter, even if it's a case of simple theft, there will be some red herrings. What was interesting in this particular case was that how the whole idea was built up of Neeraj Grover's body being cut into 200 pieces, which gives it a really macabre sort of element to the murder. Whereas, and I'm not being facetious here, his body was dismembered into about 6 or 7 pieces for the simple expediency of how do you remove a body from a flat in a Mumbai high rise, right? So I think everything was when the cops realize, and so does the media. I'm not painting the media in some sort of flattering light, but when we realize that there is something salacious, so there's an element of, a case that can go far, everything gets accentuated. So if it's 4 pieces, it becomes 10 pieces. If there's a femme fatale, then she could be, her attributes get again exaggerated. So what a book allows is that it allows you time. It allows you time to, once the media has kind of the immediate spotlight has moved on, it allows you time to kind of go back to people again and again, which as an editor for newspaper, I understand daily journalism doesn't allow. So there is also that issue of that, you have to close, and with TV, it's even worse, that, you have to get the story now, and which is where most of the problems
So, Meenal, the interesting thing about the book to me was that as the story unfolded, your sympathies, and I'm going to use the word sympathy very specifically, seem to lie with the murderer. And you, in many ways, question the now release of the lady in question, who was part of this, the duo who conducted the crime. So the question that I have for you is that, given, again, I'm bringing it fast forward, today, because we're seeing the role of media in the Sushant Singh Rajput case, in the Riya Chakrabarti situation. One is, why did you, or I have inferred that, and please feel free to push back on my analysis of the fast read of the book. But the question to you is that, fast forwarding into today, one is, what is the responsibility? I'm not saying role. What is the responsibility of the media specifically? The second question to you, which is more complex, and it also has to do with the Arushi Talwar case, where the book and the film in many ways sort of looked at the case, but tried to uncover so many of the problematic inferences that the police and the CBI made in that particular thing, but certainly tilted it towards the innocence of Dr. and Mrs. Talwar. Here, of course, there was no question of innocence because the murder had been committed. But again, your sympathy seemed to lie with the murderer.
I wouldn't use the word sympathy. Maybe, I think, okay. So when you have a very, very accelerated reportage, there are lots of things that, it's all broad brushstrokes, right? And because there were, for instance, in this instance, there were three protagonists. One was dead and two were in custody. So there was no chance to get their version. What you actually got was only what the police said. So it was important. So what you perhaps construe as sympathy was actually me just trying to present what they went through as well. So these, now it has come to, because this accelerated media coverage is so huge that that just presenting the other side is now seen as sympathetic. So that was not the case. In the Arushi case, by the way, I just want to say here that Aviruk Sen's book was a result of, he reported the trial on a daily basis for the Mumbai Mirror. And one of the reasons, though we were a Mumbai paper, to commission him to do this was to actually understand that, what goes beyond the media trial. Because the real story very often actually happens behind that, or post the media trial is when the real story unfolds.
I mean, we're going to come back to that when you're talking about the real story unfolds, because obviously, again, I need to refer to what's happening today. Yes. But I'm going to just come back. Mr. Singh, one of the things that you were very effective, or the Delhi police or the special cell was very effectively able to do at that point of time, is actually use the media to try and get people to, one, be very careful, to look to identify unknown objects left behind. Tell us a little bit about how you engaged it. Of course, it was a very different media then to what it is today, but still, how were you able to do that so effectively?
See, there were two aspects after this 13th September explosion in Delhi. One was the investigation of the case. The second is how to prevent explosions subsequently. Now, for preventing explosion, you have to alert Delhi. You have to alert people, markets. You have to deploy door frame metal detectors in the market. Put more CCTV systems in the market. So, number one is Delhi police interacted with the resident welfare associations, market associations, requested them to come to the aid of the police, to supplement police force actually, and they came, and a lot of huge help was there from the public. The second was, we had started a system known as Eyes and Ears scheme, which has large number of people who are sitting, like somebody sitting at his residence or somebody sitting in the market. The people who are selling something, they were involved prior to even this, and they could have the phone number of the beat constables. They could give information to the beat constables that if they are seeing anything suspicious. So that comes to the help of the police in preventing the explosions in further. Then we have the system of giving the advertisement in the newspapers, what public should do, what public should not do. If they feel there is any unidentified object, they immediately should report to the police 100 number rather than touching it themselves. So it came a good help from the public and from the media in spreading the message what they should do in preventing explosions in the future.
Before I ask you the next question, I just want to tell our listeners and viewers that should you need to ask any questions of Meenal or Mr. Singh, either about the Batla house, which has just finally arrived on my desk, the book. So thank you so much for this. Or the case that Meenal Baghel has written about. Please do type it into the comment section below, and we will take it during the course of the thing. Mr. Singh, one of the things we have always told the police, whether it's at the GRP Thana at the New Delhi railway station, where, I'm also part, Lambe Baal hai, so I become the heads of many different organizations. So I also help set up something called the Salam Balak Trust. We look after street children. So आपका जो balloon seller था ना, Rahul, after having been the witness, he was sent to Salam Balak Trust. One of the things I had asked him at that point of time, I said, "Aapko kaise pata tha कि this is something that you had to report?" So if you can tell us how you work, or how does the police work with, I mean, normally you would always suspect a street person कि ये चोर है, ये निकम्बा है, ये कुछ नहीं करते, and yet you made them very much part of your investigation. Similarly, even in the three-wheeler scooter incident, where the person who got off the three-wheeler said to the scooter driver कि मेरा bag आपके पास मैं छोड़ के आ रहा हूँ, and he goes into a shop and disappears. Tell us a little bit about how that happened, and then the second part of my question, Mr. Singh, is going to be about emails, but we'll come to that. Tell us about this.
See, the terrorism is not done by the people who are on the streets. It is done by the people who are indoctrinated, radicalized. The people who are on the street, they are earning their livelihood. As I told you in Eyes and Ears scheme, that was elaborate scheme where precisely these people who just observe what is happening around. And if they are sitting there, if they are standing there for a longer period, they will know any abnormality which is taking place. So using those people for collection of intelligence is very, very important. That scheme was implemented in Delhi. Then secondly, immediately after the blast takes place, then one tries to find out who are the people in that vicinity. Everybody is asked if they know anything. So there are some people who come forward and they tell, yes, we have seen this, something abnormal they have seen. Similarly, if you see, there were 3 bombs which were diffused. 2 of these bombs were reported to the police by the people who are on the roads. They informed, and then the beat constables immediately took it out, stripped it.
So I just want to put into perspective, one was the Barakhamba in the rubbish dump, one was outside the Regal Cinema in the waste bin, where your police personnel just went and ripped it, opened it, and was able to defuse it.
And one was an India Gate Children's Park.
Sorry, an India Gate Children's Park, yeah.
So that is a process, and we don't suspect the children or anybody standing on the road to be a wrong person. Actually, they are the very persons who help us in detecting many crimes.
So, Mr. Singh, I have to now challenge that a little bit. Ki, ज़्यादातर क्या होता है कि the children or these people on the street look at the police with great mistrust and distrust. Whether it's people in a basti, whether it's people, street families, etc. Because the way sometimes that the police or the local constable treats them, and we've seen where we are always dealing with the police, and of course there's much more awareness today than there's ever been. We've been working for 32 years in the street. But ये मुझे बताइए कि the need for police reforms, the need for better training. Today, the police is still referred to as a force, which is pretty much a colonial hangover. Whereas in many ways, the police should be the police service, because they're providing service to the community, to the people. They're protecting them, and they must be able to find confidence building measures to be able to stop, because it's impossible today to stop crime. It's impossible also to a large extent to be able to prevent all untoward incidents, including terrorism. And what you need to do is build confidence. So what do you think, Mr. Singh, given that, when you, in this particular incident, you all worked so closely, despite the allegations later in the Batla house incident, but you all work so closely with the community, with people, to be able to be able to investigate and be able to bring this case to some fruition.
See, I agree with you. The police image has suffered a lot and it is not improving. Now, I attribute it to two reasons. One is the police behavior. And the secondly, at certain level, there is a lack of professionalism. Now, police behavior comes because if you see, there is a shortage of manpower. We have today sanctioned strength of the police around 181 policemen per lakh of population. There is a large number of vacancies, 24% vacancies are there. So that result is 137 policemen per 1 lakh population. While the United Nations recommends it should be 222. So because of the shortage of manpower, the policemen had to work for a longer hours of the duty. They don't meet their families for weeks together. That when one meets the family, a sort of compassion comes into the mind. He understands what is a family. But when one is away from the family for a longer period, a sort of hardening comes to him. So that is one reason. The second reason is how do you measure the performance of the police? Today we have the only statistics as the measure of performance of the police. How many cases have taken place? And if somebody wants to prove that he is efficient, what he will do? He will do not registering the cases, not controlling the crime, but controlling the registration of the cases. And that is precisely happens that if somebody wants to show he is more professional, then registration of the cases will not take place. We have seen in Delhi police. For example, it's 1979. There was free registration. Every case was registered. The number of cases rose. Then there were two attempts made by two CPs. One of them, Mr. VN Singh, was transferred because of the rising registration of the case. I will not say rising. Then Mr. Bhimsen Basi came. He said total registration of the cases should be there. Unfortunately, the government supported him. Otherwise, what happens is when the cases rises, media says there is a rise in crime. The issues are raised in the parliament. The government sometimes may not find itself able to support, and the officer is transferred. So number one is we have to change the how to measure the performance of the police force. One can have measures like what is the public perception of the professionalism. That may be the better standard to judge the police force. Secondly, we have no innovations taking place in police. Investigation, new innovation should be there. Modern technology should be introduced. Somewhere it has been introduced, but it has to go to the grassroots level of the police force, like the head constable and sub-inspector who are investigating the case. They should be able to use modern technology. We might use, we have large number of data, we might use artificial intelligence, big data analysis to understand how the crime will take place next. We are not innovating. Even you take example of law and order situations, handling. We have the same pattern of handling the law and order. That is, first issue warnings that we will use lathi charge, then gas, and then firing. We have not developed because situation is changing. If you go in the city, streets are small. There is no possibility of using lathi charge. People are throwing stones. So how do you handle that? There need to be investigation. There need the research on that, but researches are missing in the police. Then the expert support is not available to police. They have to find out their own expert support. One investigating officer will search somebody who can help him. But institutional support should be there. Financial analysis, for example. Police is a sub-inspector or head constable is not expert in analysis. The financial reports, financial systems, somebody should be provided to them. So many laws have come. And every law has to be investigated by, the criminal law has to be investigated by head constable or ASI or SI. They may not be expert in law. So we need professionalism to inculcate it in them. And then think of training. The government is giving anybody who is posted in training institute 30% extra. But people are still do not want to go as an instructor in training institutes. Because training is the most important part. If you are not imparting training to the people, they will not learn. And if they don't learn, They will not do proper investigation. So these are all the various areas where police reforms are required, and that can help improving police better. Community,
Let
community.
me come, Mr. Singh, I'm going to come back to you. Meenal, the world over, at least in democratic countries and in the major cities, the New Yorks, the Londons, etc., the police commissioner sort of tends to take regular press briefings, conferences, depending on what the incident level is. In you, as I mean, now wearing your editorial hat, what do you feel, given the, and I'm going to use the word unraveling very specifically, given the unraveling of the present Sushant Singh Rajput crime, which has got enhanced in every possible way, what do you think the responsibility, or what do you think the relationship between media, and I'm not talking about yellow press, and I'm not talking about, I'm talking about mainstream media, be it television, digital or print, and the police should be? Because obviously it is an important symbiotic relationship. So there's no point sort of saying that nahi, ye nahi hota, ya wo nahi hota, but rather than always having to resort to sort of feeds or not acknowledged statements. Because what Mr. Singh also talked about is that the police don't have access to good forensic investigation or resources, whereas media, to a large extent, has. You all can go to every expert, get them onto your television channel, decide that, as we've seen, they analyze and give it. And to some extent, we have seen that the police then tend to be influenced because they feel that, acha, the media has got more information than us and a better analysis. So what do you feel should be this relationship? And what's the line? Also, where do you feel the line needs to be drawn? Because there has to be a line.
Yes, of course. So I think the biggest change that has happened in the last few years is that the media has kind of lost its healthy skepticism towards figures of authority. So the whole basis of the media that's speaking truth to power has absolutely been demolished. Uh, so what has been happening specific to police and journalists, I think, and this is not just in Mumbai, it's in Delhi, it's in most cities, is that the police media has started. So in Mumbai, for instance, off the record briefing is now the norm. But you can say anything off the record, you have no accountability. And the media, because again, there is such a race to kind of breaking news, that you reproduce that unaccounted, unquestioned uh, statements. You spoke about forensics, etc. But I must tell you, in the case of Sushant and Ria, for instance, where was the majority of the stuff coming from? It was in the course of the investigation, the various agencies were widely leaking stuff. They were leaking WhatsApp chats. They were leaking bank account details. So media was.
Meenal, can you clarify when you saying they were leaking?
So the investigative agencies who were investigating, in this case, there was the ED, there was CBI, there was the Narcotics Control Bureau. In fact, the leaks were coming so hard and fast that we had to sort of say, okay, maybe this leak today and that. So it was just, it was like a waterfall. So so the media, I think the healthy skepticism that I'm talking about has just gone. And we need to go back to journalism 101, that that whole two sources, confirming things with two sources. We don't have to do anything radical. We
So
just have to.
is that the line?
That's the line. That's the line. That's the red line that you
that
get.
fact check,
Yes.
two sources, push back on anything that comes.
We don't have to do anything radical. We just have to go back to the basics, that fact check, fact check, fact check. There is no fact checking happening.
So, Meenal, Mr. Singh, both of you have talked about the need for better training. And Mr. Singh, I have lectured at the police academy a number of times on child rights and the issues thereof. Meenal, I speak to a number of education institutions in terms of journalism and entertainment, etc. And in both, the question that arises, and this is what I want to pose to you, is that, and this is much more true perhaps, Mr. Singh, of the police force. And I said this once to a police commissioner. I said, sir, when you are recruiting people at that very base level, if you're going to recruit people from across the spectrum who perhaps don't have the aptitude needed to be part of this force, therein lies the first problem. Similarly, Meenal, in journalism school today, you have all kinds of people who've joined. What is the responsibility at that very first stage of being able to uh, uh, weed out or able to admit those people, not necessarily because they can pay for being able to attend a course, but because they may go on to becoming good journalists or good police professionals? And both, and Mr. Singh, this is both at the level of the beat policeman. So I'm not talking about the IPS where you have to do an examination and there's a basic line. Though, of course, you don't choose to be, you don't necessarily choose IPS cadre. You can choose IAS or whatever, or IRS, and you can be given IPS. So in both cases, what is your suggestion?
So if I may, sorry, you wanted to.
Mr. Singh, go ahead.
Yeah, at the time of selection, the process is at any level, the written test and interviews. We do not have psychological tests of the person to understand what is the psychology of the person and how good or bad he could be a policeman. That is one part which is missing. Second part is, even if there are people who are not in the initial stage tuned to policing, but the training can be such that these people can be made better to understand what is happening around, better to understand about the society. It is a possibility. But as I was mentioning, training institute is considered to be not a very good place.
Punishment posting.
Considered to be punishment posting. So we have to change even the training methodology. Maybe we start the online training where anybody just log in and understand what is there, rather than going to the training institute. Training institute is fine. For example, there may be many people who have good understanding. We can have a university, online university, where any police officer who is interested can join and can understand, can learn more and more. So we have to, that's what I'm saying, we have to change the technology. I had also suggested to one of the university in Delhi that why don't you start a knowledge management stream. What happens in knowledge management? A large number of policemen, or maybe any industry, I'm giving example of policemen, they retire. They have a vast knowledge with them. This vast knowledge remains unutilized. That their tacit knowledge can be put into the computer systems, and the resource persons' names can be put into the computer systems. And that knowledge database can be used by the police officers to go through the various situations which they can encounter, and that can help. Therefore, training is very, very important in bringing a person to be at par, to be best. That is what is required.
In fact, very jokingly, one day, Mr. Singh, I had said to one of your commissioners कि सारे force को दो serial दिखा दीजिए, Bones. I don't know whether you've seen the serial Bones from the United States, which sort of is a forensic serial. I said, वो दिखा दीजिए, at least they'll learn something. Meenal, your comment on training, and then I'm going to just end with one quick question to both of you.
So I think the one thing that is common to both journalists and to people in the police force is the disproportionate power they wield. We must be mindful of the power that they wield. I'm not so sure whether this understanding can be sort of how should I say, can be embedded, inculcated in people at the joining level, at the entry level. But I think if over time, like journalism, is a craft. The more you practice it, the better you get, hopefully. So the idea is that it has to be something that has to be learned in the newsroom. So you have to create a learned culture where you know that you have to use this power very, very responsibly. And I think a lot of responsibility lies with editors, with senior IPS officers, that what is the culture that you are creating. And of course, you do need training from time to time. I mean, there's no denying that. But I think the most basic thing is that the understanding that you wield disproportionate power and that you have to wield it very, very responsibly.
Unfortunately, Meenal, even as we speak, that disproportionate power is being used in newsrooms for all the wrong reasons, and the kind of perhaps example, as you said, role models that are being developed, where you're shrieking and shouting and asking questions is just completely wrong. But that's another conversation. Last quick question to both of you. Problematic, Mr. Singh. You talk about how emails were examined to be in the Batla House encounter inquiry. And the question that I have for both of you is, what therefore should be perhaps important in terms of individual rights where it comes to accessing stuff like emails, phone conversations, etc.? Is there a line for that? Is there a law that needs to be brought into that? What do we need to do? Mr. Singh.
See, there is a law. The information, the Indian Telegraph Act provides the provisions. In what circumstances any phone can be intercepted. Section 69 of the Information Technology Act also provides in what circumstances.
Mr. Singh, that's never, as we know, it's never ever actually looked at, because police, we know that there are safe houses across many cities where phones are tapped and emails are seen, not legally.
No,
and there's been enough inquiries on that as well. So what is the line? Is there a line?
see, there is a line, because any phone which is taken under observation, the approval has to come. If it is a state government, then the state home secretary, and if it is a central government, the central government home secretary. So there is a line. It is not possible that you put phone under observations without the knowledge of the home secretary of the state or the central government. That is not possible. What you are talking is perhaps the one instrument which comes where it is a offline instrument which comes around to 8 crores of rupees, where it is possible to tap certain phones connected to particular cell towers. But the government has banned them, and nobody can purchase without the permission of the central government.
Meenal, in the UK, they tapped phones of individuals. They used that. Newspaper editors and newspaper bosses use that, sometimes politically, for political cause, but a lot of the time for primarily increasing the sales of their papers. What do you think is the line?
Well, we know what happened to those editors, right? And the UK, thankfully, has a corrective mechanism where this was
But we don't.
exposed.
But we don't.
Yes. Where this was exposed and they had to pay a price. And I think whether it's the police or the media, I think we need to build some prices to be paid for crossing that red line.
Mr. Singh, Meenal, Baghel, thank you so much. I mean, there's so many bits of conversation we could have continued with both your books, with both your experience. Thank you for being on the Media Rumble.